My name is Justin, and I am an addict. And thanks to my God, the steps, and the fellowship of other addicts, I'm sober one day at a time since June 19th, 2015. And for that, I am beyond grateful. Welcome to the RICO 12 speaker meeting. We are an organization whose addictions include alcohol, drugs, lust and sex, food and gambling, just to name a few. We come together from all places, faiths, and backgrounds to learn the similarities of addiction and to gain the tools and hope from others who are walking a similar path. We invite other recovering addicts with at least 1 year sobriety and who are actively working their recovery in their respective fellowships to share their experience, strength, and hope on a live Zoom meeting each Friday at noon Central Time for 20 to 25 minutes. Then we, the live audience, get the opportunity to ask questions of the speaker for another 20 to 25 minutes. In order to ask questions, please type them in the Q&A link at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you're hearing this podcast recorded and would like to participate as a live audience member in the future, or if you'd like to be a guest speaker in a future meeting, and we are filling slots in March and April right now, please go to www.reco12.com. That's RECO12.com to learn more and submit your email address there to receive weekly invitations or to submit to become a guest speaker. RICO 12 is a self-supporting service, and we appreciate your help in keeping it that way. We gratefully accept contributions to help cover the costs of the Zoom platform, podcast platform, web hosting, and administrative costs. To contribute, you can go to reco12.com/support, or you can click the link to PayPal, which will be in the chat of the live meeting and also in the show notes. When you contribute, please specify the meeting number. This is meeting number 34. Last week's meeting was with Yitzi R., and he spoke on the topic, I've recovered. Now what? If you missed hearing that very good meeting or any other meeting that we have done in the past, you can listen to them in podcast form by searching for RICO 12 Speaker Meeting Podcast on virtually any podcast platform that you use. Or you can go to the RICO 12 website and find it under the link podcast. If you find value in this service, please take a moment to go to the podcast platform of your choosing and leave a rating and review. It really does help us work our 12th step by carrying the message of recovery to more addicts who suffer. Now, one more word about our speakers before we introduce today's speaker. When we line up a speaker for a meeting, we ask them to seek guidance on what and how to present so that they can reflect the light that they have been given. That light will inspire hope, meaning, worth, and growth in each of us, the listening audience. Now, let's introduce our guest speaker for today, Jed, whose talk is entitled Attachment Rupture and Restoring Secure Attachment with Self, God, and Spouse. Now, here's a little background on Jed, who is our guest speaker for today. This is the bio that I've been sent. Jed experienced his first exposure to pornography at 9 years old when he was out riding a little motorcycle his dad had purchased for him and his brother. He had stopped to explore an old barn and found some pages someone had stashed away. His entrapment with addiction covers a span of nearly 20 years, culminating in finally reaching the point of humility where he admitted that he was an addict and needed help. Throughout two full years of counseling and 12-step work, Jed experienced the wonderful healing of the attachment ruptures that had been left in the wake of his addiction. His experience working with a professional counselor who specializes in pornography addiction led him to a decision to go into the field and also specialize. He has been working as a licensed therapist for 10 years now and practices online using HD video conferencing, which allows him to work with people all over the country and even with some people overseas. Today, Jed will be talking about how addiction causes attachment rupture with the self, with God, and with the spouse, and then how recovery brings an opportunity to restore secure attachment in all of these relationships. Take it away, Jed. The floor is yours until the bottom of the hour.
Okay. Thanks so much, Justin. It's great to be with you. I'm looking forward to sharing something that for my recovery was super fundamental, and the understanding of it, I feel like set me free from a lot of frustration and shame, and also guided a lot of what I ended up understanding. And one of the most important tools I use when I'm helping people in their own recovery. So to kind of introduce attachment, it's something maybe people have heard about. It's a fairly popular psychology platform. But attachment theory started back after World War II. A guy named John Bowlby, who was a psychiatrist. They were working with a lot of kids that had been affected by the war. And a lot of them had been separated from their parents, either permanently because of death or because of the war. They'd been evacuated, a few things like that. And so he came up with a theory that hypothesized that kids who had certain things missing in their relationship would end up having attachment struggles, that they wouldn't know how to do relationships as well. And so that's kind of where attachment theory got its start. What Bowlby found were three things being vital to relationships and the ability to feel secure in a relationship. I'm going to share my screen now for those who are watching, and for those not, I can put a link. I'll send Justin these handouts in PDF form so you can download those. Let's see. Oh, Justin, looks like you need to enable the screen share option there. While that's coming up, the basic idea of secure attachment is that three needs have to be met. The first one is safety. And
you should be able to share your screen now.
Okay, got it. Okay, so the first need we're going to talk about is safety. Safety basically boils down to the ability to feel that there's consistency and trust. So for example, physical safety would mean that I've got a place that I feel is safe to live, to get food, to have enough. I don't have to worry about where my next meal is coming from, for example. Consistency around emotional needs and safety is, I feel like if I have an important thing to share, if I have an emotion, I can share it and I won't be belittled or made fun of or ignored. And then trust has to do with the ability to know that the person who's my attachment figure is being honest. And when I have that consistency, I know that the things they say, they follow through on for the most part. That helps me to feel safe. The second need we'll talk about is belonging. Belonging is the feeling that I could not be replaced. In other words, I'm special and I'm needed. Pretty self-explanatory. We just need to feel that I'm not just some random person to this attachment figure in my life. They wouldn't replace me easily. And if I were gone, it would be noticed and I would be missed. And I feel like I have a special spot in this relationship. And then the final need is esteem. Esteem is a sense that I'm worthy of love and connection. Pretty simple on that one. We just want to feel that we're worthy to be loved and that our connection is something that's valued. So when we have those needs arise, and we will because life is stressful in different ways at different age periods, when a stress arises, attachment theory would say that we need to turn to someone we would call a primary attachment figure, and they would help us to meet our need. And as they help us meet our need, we then both move on to relaxation. So a quick classic example would be a mother and a baby. When a baby's hungry, that's a safety need that's in a state of stress. It doesn't feel very good to have an empty stomach. So the baby lets the mom know about that stress by crying. The mom actually also goes into a state of stress because it doesn't feel good to have your baby crying. And her stress would be more related to belonging and esteem. She wants to be the one who knows how to take care of her baby, and she doesn't want to be replaced by anyone else. Stronger and wiser and kind, the mom picks up the baby and feeds the baby. And almost immediately, as that warm milk goes into the baby's stomach, it starts to relax. And also for the mom, as she looks down at that cute little baby face and sees the baby relaxing, she also relaxes. And both of their needs were met. The baby got the food that it needed and some belonging. And the mom got a great sense of belonging and esteem. So every time that happens, We call that the dance of attachment. And every time that happens, whether it's feeding or as they grow up in other ways, we call that an attachment experience in the dance of attachment. And the more that that happens, it reinforces the attachment and trust in that relationship. So as we move through life, ideally we should develop a secure attachment with our parents, and then with God, and then with a spouse. And then once we become, parents, we can become a secure attachment figure for our children. So here's where we have to talk about addiction. Addictive substances and activities come into play, and become a substitute form of relaxation. And so let me share my screen again and show a different picture of this same cycle. So you'll notice that the needs of safety, belonging, and esteem don't change. Those are always going to be needs we have as humans. The stresses in life don't change. Those are going to be pretty much a part of everyone's life. What changes, though, is we find these shortcuts. Addictive substances or activities bring a sense of relaxation. They're a quick fix, and they're efficient and effective temporarily. But especially in the honeymoon phase of an addiction, it feels to the person who's experiencing the addictive substance or activity as if they had just found a new, extremely powerful primary attachment. Every time they turn to it, it shows up and brings relaxation. And it feels great, and it doesn't seem to have caused any problems. That honeymoon phase is one of the most dangerous phases of an addiction, because we're getting entangled in something, not realizing that it actually is starting to create problems. One of the ways those problems come to the surface eventually is in the form of an attachment rupture. You'll notice that after the stress hits, what used to happen is we would turn to a primary attachment figure to feel safety, belonging, and esteem. What happens when we pick up an addictive substance or activity is we're replacing that person with a shortcut. So you can imagine what starts to happen to the feeling that person has in the dynamic dance of attachment. They start feeling like they've been replaced. They start wondering if they're worthy of love and connection, because if they were, why would we turn to something else besides them? And finally, safety starts to erode, because when an addiction shows up and we become more and more addicted, our consistency, the way that we show up in relation to our values, in relation to our roles, starts to change. And trust ultimately becomes eroded, because most of the time with addiction, we're covering it up. We don't want people to know we're taking a shortcut. But when they find out that we have been, now the trust in the relationship gets damaged. And so you can see how safety, belonging, and esteem all just took a black eye and a bloody nose, so to speak. What used to feel like a secure attachment now has become what we would call an insecure attachment. And that happens in every significant relationship, because addictions are counterfeit attachments and they replace real attachments. So with God, we start to feel on our side less safety. We start to feel like we don't belong because we don't feel worthy, which leads to the esteem. Our sense of being worthy of love and connection takes a nosedive. And so with God, we move away from his love. We start to doubt whether or not he would actually love us. And as a result of alienating or distancing ourselves from him, we have an attachment rupture. That's what's so wonderful about the beginning phases of 12 steps, right? Steps 2 and 3 lead us back to a place where we can start believing again in the possibility of a restored, secure attachment with God. where he has the power to help us, that he would love us enough to want us to come back into a secure attachment relationship with him. And then as we move into other relationships with ourselves, a lot of times the behavior we engage in goes contrary to the morals and values that we have been taught and that we wanted to have in our life. As a result, we have a secure attachment rupture because we don't feel even a sense of belonging with ourselves. And the double life that comes from having an addiction does not feel like safety, doesn't feel consistent. The belonging gets damaged. And even the esteem, toxic shame, is basically an attack on our esteem. We don't feel worthy of love and connection. So as we work steps 4 through 9, we can start to restore a secure attachment with our true self. We overcome character defects. We have God help us with that process. We start to feel more esteem and more belonging. And the pattern that we develop in relation to recovery develops safety. We start to trust ourselves again. Part of that process is usually developing secure attachment with a counselor and someone that would be a sponsor in the 12-step program. It can be really vital in helping us restore a secure attachment with ourselves because that's been damaged. And the other place, and maybe one of the most vital places to talk about, is the attachment with a spouse. When we use an addictive substance or activity, their ability to feel safety, belonging, and esteem takes a major hit. The addiction that I struggled with, as was mentioned in the introduction, was pornography. And as I work with people struggling with pornography addiction, the condition that we talk about in relation to their spouse is betrayal trauma. Betrayal trauma comes from attachment rupture. It comes from the feeling that I'm not safe in this relationship because I don't know if I'm getting honesty and transparency or not. It comes from a feeling like my belonging might have taken a hit because apparently I am easily replaced. All he has to do is click his mouse or go to a website on his phone. Within 10 seconds, he's got someone or something connecting with him in an intimate way. And so I feel replaced. And finally, esteem, the sense that I'm worthy of love and connection, gets damaged. Again, talking specifically about pornography here, but it could be alcohol or something else. If the thing that they're accessing is easy and there's a lot of novelty, how could I compete with that? In the world of pornography, as quickly as you can click your mouse, you can have something new and different. And that's something that any woman, I don't care how beautiful they are, how physically attractive they may be, they can't compete with new and different. You can't change your body that fast. You can't change your looks that fast. And so as a woman considers what she's up against, so to speak, it feels like a major hit to their esteem. How could they compete? So obviously there's a lot of work on the wife's side with S&On. In our program, it's called S&On, where they work on letting go of things they can't control. They work on understanding things about their own attachment to their self and to God, so that they're not so dependent on whether or not their husband is sober or not, and how that relates to their own sense of worth and belonging. Ultimately, the goal of recovery is to heal attachment ruptures that have happened. In relation to our attachment with God, we've talked about, steps 2 and 3. And then he shows up again in steps 6 and 7 when we become ready to have him remove our defects of character. That's a process that involves a lot of introspective work. Are we actually ready to let go of these other things that have kind of been a counterfeit attachment in our life. Sometimes that's lust, sometimes it's alcohol, but there's other subtle things that we've been using to prop up our life, like procrastination, telling half truths, accepting external validation instead of relying on internal validation. So all these defects of character, God shows up and says, I'm here to help you. If you'll let go of them, you'll feel more safety, belonging, and esteem. And as we work step 7, we feel that power. Of course, we have to keep working step 10 eventually, which is once we've done the work of step 7, we continue to take a moral inventory. And when we're wrong, promptly admit it, because we're not perfect. We're going to make mistakes. And the important thing to salvage the attachment relationship is to promptly admit when we're wrong and work step 10. As far as healing the attachment with self, the whole process of recovery, if you're doing it correctly and thoroughly, should include work to help you heal yourself. For example, in the introduction, it was explained that I was a 9-year-old boy that was exposed to pornography. I had no idea when I was 9 years old what was happening inside my brain. I didn't know what dopamine was. I didn't know what adrenaline was, testosterone, oxytocin, serotonin. Zero idea of what that was. I just knew it felt extremely powerful and I wanted to experience it again. But I also felt shame and embarrassment. I didn't feel like my esteem, my sense of love and belonging would stay intact if I told my parents. I thought it was something so bad. I'd been taught that it was bad. And I thought I just need to fix that on my own because it'll affect what I now know is a sense of esteem and attachment. And so part of the healing is not only stopping the behavior, the shortcut, but it's also about healing that younger child part of you. And that's what in the recovery process where I help a lot of my clients, we go to that deeper place of understanding where maybe some of the attachment ruptures happened with God and with themselves. And then they can do a much better job of healing the attachment ruptures with a spouse. But it's got to start with God and with self, because that's where the first attachment ruptures happened. And so to kind of finish out this topic, I believe that our higher power wants us to feel secure attachment. He wants us to have multiple relationships where we feel safety, belonging, and esteem, because that's what brings happiness. And my understanding of God is that he wants us to have joy. And joy comes from committed relationships where we have secure attachments. So my wish for all of the people listening and for my continued recovery personally is that we can make the sacrifices needed to understand our own attachment ruptures, to then have the right people come into our life that can help us as we work through those attachment ruptures. And that as we work the steps, that will help us restore secure attachment. Because then we're much more capable of taking the message of recovery to other people. And the world we live in is a world that needs the message of recovery. The world we live in puts way too much emphasis on counterfeit forms of attachment. And if we can take this message to other people after we've experienced our own attachment restoration, we'll be helping a lot of people and the world will be a better place. So that's the essence of it. I hope that helped and made some sense, and we can take.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jed. I really appreciate your message here. And I loved the diagrams. It really helped clarify to me what an attachment rupture was. That was a new concept to me. And that's a really neat thing that has opened my eyes to some new things. And thank you so much for this topic of attachment rupture and restoring secure attachment with self, God, and spouse. Now, a reminder to those of you who are listening live to ask questions of Jed. Please type them in the Q&A link at the bottom of your Zoom window. It looks like two speech bubbles over the top of each other, and we'll get to those questions here in a minute. Before we move to that, Jed, do you mind sharing a little bit about the 12-step program that you currently are a part of and how that helps you? This isn't to market it. It's just to share with those who listen how 12-step programs help you.
Yeah, absolutely. So the people that me and my wife had as sponsors in our recovery work were Stephen and Real Croshaw. They are great people. They were a couple of years ahead of us in recovery, and they came to one of our, we were in a program called Lifestar, and they came to a phase 1 meeting and shared some of their message of hope and recovery. And we just came to know them better and better as we went through that first experience of recovery. And I eventually had Stephen as my sponsor and Real was my wife's. So as they developed a program called SA Lifeline, we participated in that program. We went to some of the very first meetings that they ever had as an organization. Back then, it was just a part of SA and S-Anon. But with the program, we wanted to be able to offer prayers from the heart. And S-Anon and SA didn't really allow for that. So we just started one called SA Lifeline. And it's basically the same thing as SA and S-Anon, but a few changes would be that you could use specific names for God, and you could also give a prayer from the heart. Other than that, we used the S-Anon and SA materials. And they've also developed some materials unique to SA Lifeline. So those are available. You can go to salifeline.org and find their website. There's a link there you can click on if you want to attend meetings. And those are available online. And there are some in person. With COVID, they've had some of the in-person ones also go to online. But and those are available to anybody, anywhere, which I love because I got clients all over the country and even overseas. And as long as you figure out the time zone difference, you can go ahead and attend those. And they're free of charge as well. So
awesome. Thank you so much, Jed. I appreciate that. And that's some helpful resources for those who struggle with porn addiction, sex addiction, lust addiction, whatever you want to call it. Great resources. A question that I have to get us started off here from what you shared, Jed, is, some people that I work with, and myself included, sometimes that voice in my head is just so loud. How do I become convinced that I belong or that I'm worthy of love when that voice in my head is just telling me the opposite? How do you work with somebody in that sense?
That's a great question. I think that's the age-old battle, right? Between what God wants us to feel, which is love, longing, safety, and what Satan wants us to feel, which is toxic shame, that we're not worthy. So I think one of the greatest things to do is to study the God who is merciful, the God who is an extender of grace. Look at the stories where he showed up in those ways. And I have my clients put together what's called a first aid kit. One of those things that I have them put in the first aid kit are pictures from the life of Christ. He is, in my personal recovery, my higher power. And so there's a lot of stories where Christ showed up at the times when people were at their most broken or desperate. A few examples of that. When Peter tried to walk on the water, he wasn't just who had witnessed Christ performing miracles, doing all sorts of amazing things, teaching the Sermon on the Mount, all these things. And yet, despite having witnessed with his own eyes, he found himself about to drown. He had to call out, "Lord, save me." So there's pictures out there you can find on the internet of Christ reaching towards Peter in the water. And that's a reminder to me that Christ isn't going to walk away because we make mistakes or because our faith didn't match or our action didn't match what we say we believe or what we know is true. I think that's one of the greatest character defects to take note of, is where we expect ourselves to live up to what we know is true. It's really hard because it's good to strive to live up to what we know is true. But when we have shame for not showing up and living according to what we know, that develops a sense that we're not worthy of love and connection. And that's what grace is. Grace is the difference between enabling, which is the dark side of, or the counterfeit for grace. It says it doesn't matter what you do whatever you want. In the end, you can just say, I'm sorry, and everything will be forgotten. That's, again, a counterfeit version of grace. Grace says it doesn't matter what you've done. You're still worthy of unconditional love and connection. God is always going to be willing to show up when you start asking him to show up. He won't force it, but he'll always be there. A couple other examples, if it's okay. Christ taught, he said, come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I shall give you rest. To me, that says, I know that the time you're going to need me the most is when you've got a heavy burden, when you need rest, right? So that's another example of him just saying, I get it. I know that you're going to need me when you've got heavy burdens, and that's when I want you to come unto me. When he would show up with lepers, when he would show up with people that were blind, when he went to sinners and publicans, like his whole message was, I'll meet you at your worst moment. And that was even symbolized in the Last Supper when he washed the apostles' feet. He wasn't, I'm sure the feet weren't the cleanest part of their body. They wore sandals, and there's probably fungus and dirt, and toenails gross a lot of people out. They gross me out. I don't think I would want the Savior touching my feet, but he said, if you don't let me do this, you won't have a place with me in my kingdom. And I think what he was trying to do is send a message that you need to get this, that I'm here to show up at the stinkiest, dirtiest, worst place. And if you'll let me, I'll serve you in that moment. And in my recovery experience, that was one of my biggest character defects, was believing that I had to fix what I had done, and then I could approach God and ask for forgiveness. And the 12 steps taught me different. They said I could show up and believe in a power greater than myself, even though I had just admitted that I was powerless over something as bad as lust, So.
Awesome. Thank you. And I loved that description of the feet washing, the Savior washing the disciples' feet, and Peter's in particular, with where you talked about there. I'd never quite put it that way or understood it that way. Thank you for sharing that. That opens my eyes to one more thing that I love about that story. Yeah. All right. We have a question that came in from one of our live attendees, Monroe. He asks, how can I teach proper attachment to my children? And this next part is just as vital, I think, and it's onto it. And how can I repair an attachment rupture with them, that I've caused?
Oh, great question. So teaching secure attachment to your kids, obviously the best way is to model it. I think one of the ways that we really mess up as parents is when we act like we've got it all figured out. And we don't allow our kids to see our brokenness. I think especially around something embarrassing like pornography use, sometimes parents don't tell their story. They keep their story vague. In some ways, at some ages, that's appropriate. But as your kids become teenagers, they're not naive. They know this world is full of things like lust offerings. And so to share some of your own journey, some of your own desperate need for the atonement and for God, it opens the door for them to be vulnerable and to say, you know what, I think I had an experience like that too, where I felt an attachment rupture. But if we've never talked about the attachment rupture side of attachment, when they experience it, it's going to feel alien to them to be able to talk about it. So I think we have to be vulnerable and talk about the things that we do that may cause an attachment rupture. Like one of my character defects, and I'm 13 years into recovery and I'm still working on it, is patience. I've got 5 kids. 2 of them are teenagers. The third one's almost a teenager. And patience is something that I find myself having to work step 10 on. And I still have a lot of work to do there. But what I try to do is when I recognize that character defect came back, I try to go to the person, whether it's, my son who's a sophomore and just typical teenage stuff. I have to own my side of the drama that I participated in. If I acted like a victim because he wasn't doing the thing that I wanted him to do in the way I wanted him to do it, I have to come and own that and explain, hey, I've got this character defect. I've known about it for years. I've been striving to figure it out, but I'm still working on it. And I need to own that I made this mistake with you. That's what we call a repair attempt in attachment. And repair attempts are vital in all of our attachment relationships. It's what we do with God when we approach him and say, you know what, I made a mistake. It's what repentance is. And doing step 10 work is a great way to make repair attempts. The person who is on the other side of that has the agency to choose how to respond to our repair attempt. But the more humility and ownership we can take, the better that repair attempt is going to go. An example of maybe not being as humble as we could be is if we say, this and this happened, and I need to take ownership for it. If we use the word but to then defend and explain ourselves, we just devalued our repair attempt. And so that might be a key you could watch for is as you work on making repair attempts with your kids, try not to say but and explain or defend your behavior. There may be a logical or reasonable explanation of why, like my son, for example, didn't get up and go to football weightlifting one day when he should have. We were going to go on a vacation the next week. He was going to miss 3 days. And it was blowing my mind that he didn't get it, that he needed to get up and go to weightlifting because he was going to miss 3 days the next week. But in the repair attempt, the logic of why I was pushing for what I was pushing for doesn't really matter. I'm trying to make a repair attempt of an attachment. The teaching can come into play at a different time. But in the moment when you're trying to make a repair attempt, just keep it simple, own your stuff, and don't use but and then explain. So.
But what if I want to use but? No, I really appreciate that. That's good stuff to keep in mind. And I also have, I have a couple of adult children and a couple of teenage children, and that's really tough to handle those types of situations where, I've got to repair the ruptures that I have played a part in, whether I was the one that initiated it or the one that played along with it. That kind of goes into the next question that I have for you. But before I ask that, just a reminder to our live audience, if you do have a question, type it in the Q&A link there at the bottom of your Zoom window. Happy to get to it. You talked about betrayal trauma, and especially in the addiction that we're discussing today in sex and lust, pornography addiction. In every addiction that's prevalent, but that seems to be even more personal, whether it's it just seems to be more personal. How important is it? Well, let me back up a little bit. So many people that I talk to, that I work with in these types of situations come back and say, my wife says it's my problem, it's not hers, and that I need to deal with it, and she doesn't want any part of it. What do you suggest in those types of situations? Not that we can ever convince our spouse or our loved one that they need to do something. But how would you go about approaching that and saying, no, it's not your problem, but my problem affects you, and I hope that we can work on this? What are your thoughts on that?
I'm glad you brought that up. That's really powerful because women have it right to some extent. It's not their problem. They didn't choose the behavior that is the shortcut. They didn't do anything to cause their husband to turn to it. And I think that's what a lot of women are trying to avoid, is the feeling of not being enough. And they think that if they go into recovery, that somehow they're going to actually feel worse about their sense of belonging and esteem. But I would encourage women to realize that this isn't going to make you feel less if you enter recovery with your spouse. The work of recovery is the work of restoring belonging and esteem. And while you did not cause that attachment rupture, your participation in the healing of it is extremely important, because a relationship without trust isn't a very fulfilling relationship for either person. And while your lack of ability to give trust in the beginning is 100% logical and makes sense, and you have the trump card, eventually, if you don't work the steps, if you don't work recovery with your spouse, the inability to restore trust in your heart is going to make that relationship just feel heavy. And eventually it could end in divorce, because I believe what causes divorce is attachment rupture that goes untreated and unworked on. And if those repair attempts aren't received, and if recovery doesn't bring a restoration of secure attachment, a lot of times the marriage isn't something that remains as a viable option. It's too painful. And people feel like, I would rather be alone than have an attachment relationship that feels so painful. So I would just say it's part of being on this planet. I believe that the experience we're in right now is the fall part of God's plan. He knew that we would come down here. There would be a veil over our mind. We wouldn't remember being with him before. And we would be tempted. We would have a natural body that was prone to appetites and passions and all these things. And this is the fall part of the plan. And participating in recovery is kind of the upside of being in this fall experience. It's not easy, but if you'll go to the internet, you can search the 12 promises of Alcoholics Anonymous, or I say, if you'll read those 12 promises, you'll realize that recovery can be a great gift to your life experience and the fall part of this plan. So if you haven't ever read the 12 promises, I'd encourage you to go take a look at those, and that can be a motivator.
I agree fully. And I'm going to look up those 12 promises and read them here. But in the meantime, there's another question that came in that I'd like to get to. This is from one of our audience, Craig. He asks, my children are all grown and some have their own children. How can I repair the harms I have done over the years?
That's a good question. The difficult part about reaching into a generation past your own children is you've got a lot of people there with their agency that have to give approval for your recovery effort or your repair attempts. So it's not simply, you can't leapfrog your children and go to your grandchildren, for example, and make repair attempts or ask them to engage with you in attachment. Some of the most difficult work, I think, happens and their parents. But what I would say is, if you can involve a professional, someone who has done the work to become a licensed therapist and knows how family systems and family dynamics work, they could help you do the personal work in preparation for making the offer. At that point, it is up to the adult children or grandchildren to receive that. But if you've done your own work first, you'll be in such a better place to present that in an assertive way that is more likely to be received. If it comes across at all passive aggressive or aggressive, it's just going to be another thing that they'll add to the list of things that is a reason why they don't want to connect. So assertiveness is huge. I talk about drama triangles and assertiveness communication being the way to avoid drama triangles. So working with someone who can help you identify your own communication that's ineffective and how to be more assertive would be a huge key.
Thank you, Jed. I appreciate that. And I've got they're commonly known as the Step 9 promises, and there are also some Step 10 promises in the big book. These are found on pages 83 and 84, and the Step 10 promises are on page 84 and 85. But I'm just going to read the ones that he was referring to, which I'm sure is the Step 9 promises. If we are painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we are halfway through. We are going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past, nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity and will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and economic insecurity will leave us, and we will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. And then the next paragraph I think is awesome enough to read here. Are these extravagant promises? We think not. They are being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They will always materialize if we work for them. And I love those promises. Do you have any additional comments on those, Jed, as I read through those?
No, I just would say that for some reason I didn't hear those for like the first year and a half of my recovery experience. And when I heard them for the first time and really looked at them, I was again convicted to the work of recovery, because all of those are amazing. Like to have even one or two of those come into your life would be worth it. To have all 12 is just, to me, that's what the miracle of recovery is the change that comes into our lives and our relationships because of it. And those 12 promises describe those really well.
Awesome. Thank you. If we have no more questions, I have one more, and then we'll start wrapping this up. But if there is another question from the audience, please type it in the Q&A link. You mentioned inner child work, Jed. What is, and you didn't call it inner child work, but that's how I've understood it to be. What is your experience with the importance of going back to find those places from our childhood that have really been kind of a hinge point moment that have led us to where we are today? Why is that important?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in recovery, in a type of therapy called internal family systems approach, a guy named Richard Schwartz that came up with it describes our true self. And there's 8 attributes of our true self. I'll read those off. They all start with the letter C, interestingly enough. So curiosity, compassion, calmness, confidence, connection, courage, clarity, and creativity. And you can, if you want, you can Google the 8 C's of self-leadership. You can find those easily. What he hit on there is in our lives, when we experience things like addiction, what happens is our true self, parts of it go into exile. And Like, for example, the part of us tied to confidence might have been damaged. The part of us tied to curiosity might have taken a hit. Like when I was exploring that barn at 9 years old, I was curious. I was just a curious 9-year-old kid. I wanted to go climb and, see what was in the barn. And finding that made the curiosity part of me take a hit because it all of a sudden felt unsafe to be curious. So if we're going to restore our true self in the leadership position of our life, we have to go back and find those moments when any one of those 8 C words took a hit. And part of that might be compassion. A lot of my life, I hated the addict part of me. I absolutely despised this part of me that I wanted gone, but I couldn't shake. Part of the work of recovery was discovering compassion for the younger self who fell victim to a trap. The honeymoon phase of addiction is a very potent way to rope someone in. And when you start at 9 years old with pornography, it's before you even know what happened, you've got cords around you that are keeping you stuck. And so the ability to have empathy and compassion for a younger me that didn't know what was happening, that fell victim to a pattern of deceit, helped a lot to let go of the hatred towards myself. And so, yeah, I think it's really vital. And it's why in our program, we start with individual and couples counseling. We don't go right to group because I feel like if we haven't ever dug deep and done that introspective work, it's going to be hard to have, in the white book, it says we can't transmit something we haven't got. And these 8 attributes, you can't transmit confidence if there's a part of you that has confidence that was injured at a younger age and never got healed. And so that's where we start. And if people want to know a little bit more about our program, there's a little video I put together of my story. If you want a little more detail, the website is ldshopeandrecovery.com. Feel free to visit there and watch that video and just look around for other things that we have there. And we'd be happy to do free consultation with anyone that wants to talk about recovery.
Very good. I'll put that link in the show notes. And one more quick question came in. And we just have a couple minutes here, but how do I keep attachment and codependency separate? That's from Monroe.
Good question. So codependence usually comes from a type of insecure attachment called anxious attachment. When we're desperate for someone to connect with us who has been taking a shortcut, what we'll do is we'll anxiously try to attach with them. And anxious attachment creates this feeling of, I kind of feel connected to them because I kind of get them to give me what I want, but I don't really trust it. I don't really know if it's coming from them sincerely or if I'm forcing it out of them. And so instead of being able to move on to relaxation, we stay stuck in a place of anxious attachment. So anxious attachment cycles between having our need met and having stress. And it's not a fulfilling form of attachment. And by the way, usually addicts have a form of attachment called avoidant attachment. There's a whole lot of work there to describe all those, but essentially anxious and avoidant attachment is the dance of an addict and a codependent, if you look into it. So, anyway, there's so much good stuff on attachment. I love it. Anyway.
Oh, thank you for sharing all of that good stuff on attachment. And there's so much more. We didn't even scratch the surface. And thank you again, Jed. That was a great RICO 12 weekly speaker meeting for all addicts and those wanting to learn more about addiction and the recovery therefrom. If we didn't get to your question, or if you have other questions, please go to rico12.com/forum and join in the community and ask those questions and answer others' questions that will come up there. I invite our audience to come back next week. If you've not yet gone to rico12.com and submitted your email address to get on the weekly invitation list so you can get links to join us live each Friday at noon Central Time, please go do so. Like I mentioned earlier, we're looking to fill guest speakers in March and April right now. So if you'd like to give it a shot, reach out to me through the website and we will get it lined up. To close it out, Jed has asked that we close out this meeting and launch into the rest of our day with a prayer from the heart that he is that he's willing to offer. So go ahead, Jed.
Okay. Father in heaven, we're grateful for this opportunity today to gather together as fellows seeking recovery and healing. We're grateful for the opportunity to understand the things that would bring the recovery fruits and spirit into our lives a little bit better. Pray that as we move forward, we might be conscious of the attachment relationships in our lives, that we might have the Spirit guide us as to how to repair any attachment ruptures that have come into play, and that we'll be led to the people who will be able to help us on that journey. I'm grateful for all that we have and say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Jed. Keep coming back. It works if I work it, so work it. You are worth it.
Standing still a moment, carving out this time, reflecting on the landscape of this life of mine. Peaks too high to conquer, streams too wide to cross, troughs too deep to walk through without incurring loss. Yet here I am, still standing tall, despite the rough terrain. One like me survived.